Well, hello, Nativity Bible Heads. It is Dr. Wayne, and it is time for Bible Study Wednesday. This is for April 6th. This is the last of 4 parts of a teaching through the Gospel of Luke. I've emphasized this a few times that one of the things that I find of value in the Gospels is to get a quick look at the overall flow of a Gospel. And since this is the Gospel of Year C, and we'll get most of it during the season after Pentecost, that means, June, July, August, September, October, November. I thought it would behoove us to use Lent as a time for that. We might end up redoing this during Eastertide. I'm not 100% sure. But one of the things that when I went to seminary, my New Testament professor, the assignments that we had for Gospels was to read through in one sitting, basically, numerous times, each of the Gospels, and we had a particular thing we were supposed to take note of for each time we read through it. And what that exercise taught me was you really start to get an appreciation for each Gospel's singular flow. In the Gospel of Luke, I've divided it up into 4 sections. We are starting in chapter 19, verse 28. So the first the first 3/4 of the Gospel were the time of Jesus. There's always that preparation, right? The birth narratives, the baptism, the temptation, the initial ministry in Galilee, the Sermon on the Plain, okay, which is what we had in Luke. And then we had a major teaching section through chapter 9, and then he starts on his road to Jerusalem, okay? And to Jerusalem, he is basically from somewhere in chapter 9 to chapter 19, okay? Chapter 9 to 19, there are a lot of teachings that he gives on the road. Today, he enters Jerusalem. In his Jerusalem entrance, there's another major teaching piece. So there are 3 major teaching pieces in the Gospel of Luke. The one before he sets his face toward Jerusalem, the one during the journey toward Jerusalem, and then the teachings of the last week while he was in Jerusalem. And so we'll get some of those today. So last week, we left him when he was going up. Look what it says in verse 28 of chapter 19. After he had said this, he went on ahead, going up to Jerusalem. You do go up. Anytime you're going to Jerusalem, you're going up. It doesn't matter which direction you're coming from. And of course, from Jericho, you'd have to go up because Jericho is down by the Jordan River, by the Dead Sea. So therefore, you're going to definitely be going up. But this is the beginning of the end of the gospel, okay? And this is also coincidental with the Palm Sunday of which we'll have on April 10th. The same thing. Verse 29. When he had come near Bethphage and Bethany at the place called the Mount of Olives, he sent 2 of his disciples, saying, "Go into the village ahead of you, and as you enter it, you will find there a colt that has never been ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, why are you untying it? Just say this, the Lord needs it." So those who were sent departed and found it as he had told them. As they were untying the colt, its owners asked them, "Why are you untying the colt?" And they said, "The Lord needs it." Then they brought it to Jesus, and after throwing their cloaks on the colt, they sat Jesus on it. As he rode along, people kept spreading their cloaks on the road. As he was now approaching the path down from the Mount of Olives, the whole multitude of disciples began to praise God joyfully with a loud voice for all the deeds of power that they had seen, saying, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest heaven." Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, order your disciples to stop." He answered, "I tell you, if these were silent, the stones would cry out." Would shout out. So notice what we have here in Luke is not a Palm Sunday, right? The Palms are distinct to the Gospel of John. Notice that who is it that's accompanying Jesus as he enters Jerusalem? They are the people that accompanied him from Galilee, right? Very distinct, right? Some other Gospels will see where the people come out to Jesus and welcome him in. This is not what we might call a victorious entrance. This is just simply an entrance, okay? Throwing cloaks, set him on a colt, very much a kingly kind of a thing, right? In Matthew has Jesus riding in on two animals. Luke doesn't make that a faux pas, if you will. Notice that the shouts are coming from the disciples, right? Those are the disciples were the ones that were with him, had been with him, and their exclamations are basically believers who are enrolled in what he's doing, right? Where it says, and when the Pharisees, some Pharisees in the crowd said to him, that's interesting. Were there Pharisees in the crowd of disciples? Is that what this is saying? And that the Pharisees were saying, oh, wait a second, maybe this is too much. I don't know, because he distinguishes the crowd with the disciples. In Luke, the disciples are a bigger group than just the 12 apostles. They are all the people following him. We haven't heard about a crowd yet. So that's why this is an interesting plot twist where it says all of a sudden we find out that there's a crowd there. It's like, well, okay, we knew about the disciples, but we didn't know about a crowd. Well, anyway, it is an opportunity for Jesus to say something enigmatic like this about if these were silent, the stones would shout out. This is Jesus' recognition, self-recognition of himself as the Son of God, as the God of which is the God of creation, right? And this is consistent with the way Luke presents Jesus as one who is has been one with God and is on the same wavelength with God, right? As creator. The fact that the stones would shout out, this is just a recognition that the creation knows its creator, okay? As they came near and saw the city, he wept over it, saying, if you, even you, had only recognized on this day the things that make for peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. Indeed, the days will come upon you when your enemies will set up ramparts around you and surround you and hem you in on every side. I'm not going to read all of this, but Jesus is lamenting over Jerusalem's imminent destruction. It's interesting that in the way Luke has his gospel cast that Jesus doesn't ever do any teachings in Jerusalem. So therefore, we don't know what he's exactly talking about. It seems as though he is responding to the fact that they didn't follow his teachings and that he didn't have any success in Jerusalem, which would explain why things turned bad, right? But he definitely is foretelling Jerusalem's destruction, which comes about in AD 70 with the Romans, does he not? Verse 45, then he entered the temple and began to drive out those who were selling things there. This is that famous cleansing of the temple. Luke's telling of it is very perfunctory, very succinct. And he said, it is written, my house shall be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers. So notice it says he began to drive those who were selling things there. He began to drive and he said something. And then it says every day he was teaching in the temple. The chief priests, the scribes, and the leaders of the people kept looking for a way to kill him, but they did not find anything they could do, for all the people were spellbound by what they heard. It appears that the cleansing of the temple wasn't a huge, it didn't stop the activity of the temple if Jesus then used it. Remember, one of the emphases in Luke's gospel is that Jesus was a very compliant Jew, a very devoted, and every action he takes is consistent with a zealousness for the law and his tradition. So in this thing where it says, and he began to drive out those who, notice Luke doesn't use the word cleanse, okay? He says drive out. And he, notice the thing about, he began to drive out, and he said, the emphasis here isn't on the driving out. The emphasis is on what he said, okay? And as we see, look at this. Every day he was teaching in the temple, okay? So this thing that he did not get him banned. It did not get him excluded. It did not ingratiate him to the powers that be, especially the chief priests and the scribes and the leaders of, but it definitely, it didn't put him out. Okay, the next chapter, he's still there, right? One day, as he was teaching the people in the temple and telling the good news. See, this is his practice. In the week leading up to his death, this is where Luke has Jesus do a whole lot of teaching. And we see in chapter 20, this is where his authority is questioned because of the fact that he had done that thing with driving out those selling things. And how do you, what's the authority we have? What's the authority you have? He tells them a parable in verses 9 through 20 something about 9 through 19, the parable of the vineyard and the tenants. The one about the man who planted a vineyard and who took care of it, and then he leased it out, and then he sent a slave, he sent his son, about all of that. This is all a parable about the Yahwism, the religion of Judah, the religion that he was saying that the temple, the prophets, okay? The prophets, God sent the prophets to try to correct. Now God is sending his son to put in a correction. And they end up killing him, okay? Well, this is Jesus foretelling that he knows what's going to happen as a basis of everything. This is where he quotes Psalm 118, verse 22 in Luke 20, 17, where it says, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This is a passage that we read on Easter Sunday. This is a passage that was also a part of the reading for Palm Sunday, okay? Will be for both. But the thing that Jesus is doing here is claiming for himself the status of the true future for Israel's religion. His body, his crucifixion, his resurrection, this is the only temple that's necessary. Everything that's done in the temple, in this building, that thing, there's nothing super special about it. Yes, Jesus shows himself being compliant with it to a large degree, but he himself is that stone on which God's presence is to be built going forward. This is what he's saying. Let's see, verses 22, verses 20 to 26. This is where they question him about paying taxes to the emperor, and he says, pay to the emperor. What's the emperor's pay to God? What is God? He doesn't really tell them not to do or to do anything, but this is a part of the attempt to build a case against him. Because remember, they was happening here is the people, look at verse 26, chapter 20, verse 26, and they were not able in the presence of the people to trap him by what he said, and being amazed by his answer, they became silent. So he was always turning them away because of his brilliance, and the people were there. Notice one of the things it says he was teaching them, the people in the temple. So these people, they didn't have to stay. They didn't say he was preaching to nobody. One of the things that Jesus gets in trouble for is the fact that the crowds are the ones who are responding to him. The crowds love him. It's the religious authorities that are afraid of him, right? And so ultimately it is the people in positions of power are afraid that the people are going to are getting too riled up, if you will. This is the emphasis that we seem to have in Luke, because it doesn't seem like he's getting a whole lot of flack for his driving out the people who are selling things in the temple, because he was able to use the temple, and he used that as the basis of his of his teaching of the last week. They do ask him questions concerning the resurrection, the idea that there is a resurrection or is not. Jesus seems to side with the Sadducees. The Sadducees were the priests, the tradition of the priests. They did not believe in the resurrection. The Pharisees did. There were some of the scribes actually were with Jesus. If you look in verse 39 of chapter 20, it says, "Then some of the scribes answered, 'Teacher, you have spoken well.'" So there were some who were with Jesus and who were aligned with what he was doing. Notice this, for they no longer dared to ask him another question. The people were seeing, and some of the people in authority agreed with him. So therefore, this is one of the things that put those who wanted him dead, put them in a bad spot, if you will. Okay, we're going to move on. Verse 45, "In the hearing of all the people, he said to the disciples, 'Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and to have the best seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses, and for the sake of appearance, so to say long prayers, they will receive the greater condemnation.'" This is an example of how Jesus recognizes who it is that is going to eventually put him to death, right? Showmanship doesn't count for a lot. Chapter 21, got to move on. He looked up and saw rich people putting their gifts into the treasury. So notice this is also, notice all of this stuff is happening in the temple. He sees the poor widow putting in coins. Verse 5 of chapter 21, "When some were speaking about the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and gifts dedicated to God, he said, 'As for these things that you see, the days will come when not one stone will be left upon another. All will be thrown down.'" This is his prediction of the destruction of the temple. It does happen in AD 70, at the same time that the city gets destroyed by Rome in AD 70. They want to know, when is this going to happen? Jesus doesn't really say anything about when it is. It's just that he states that there's going to be a lot of deception going on. We don't ever get a clear answer on that from Jesus. And we don't know if that's because of the way our gospel writers couched the words of Christ, or if it's because they didn't want to pin him down, okay, if you will. Remember, they're writing this as though he had said all of these things before his resurrection. All right. There's a prediction here of the persecution of the disciples. This is something that does happen, and it's as a response to the the disciples it's in a response to the disciples proclaiming Jesus as Messiah. This is a major division in Judaism that Luke carries forward in his sequel, which is the Acts, the book of Acts. Verse 20, there'll be Jerusalem will be surrounded by armies. Yeah, okay, all of that. Verse 25, there will be signs in the sun, the moon, the stars, and the earth, distress amongst nations, confused by the roaring of the sea and the waves. All of this apocalyptic language gets put in the mouth of Jesus, and he speaks it at the time of his last week. Tells him a parable, the thing about the fig tree, verses 29 and following. Verse 34, he admonishes them to be alert. Don't worry about, don't let anything catch you unexpected. But then again, in chapter 21, verse 37, Luke's emphasis again, every day he was teaching in the temple, and at night he would go out and spend the night on the Mount of Olives, as it was called, and all the people would get up early in the morning to listen to him in the temple. This is the emphasis of Luke, that what Jesus is doing here is this teaching is becoming so popular with the people that it puts the religious powers, their feeling is that they are they're threatened, okay, because of the fact that they are going after this Jesus. This is a distinctive thing that we see in the Gospel of Luke. Okay, now chapter 22. Okay, we just have 3 chapters left, 22, 23, 24. 22 is where the preparations for the Passover happen. It's okay, so let's just read a little bit of that, shall we? Now the festival of the unleavened bread, which is called the Passover, was near. The chief priests and the scribes were looking for a way to put Jesus to death, for they were afraid of the people. There you have it, right? Then Satan entered into Judas, called Iscariot, who was one of the 12. He went away and conferred with the chief priests and officers of the temple police about how he might betray him to them. They were greatly pleased and agreed to give him money, so he consented and began to look for an opportunity to betray him to them when no crowd was present. This is the story of what we see with Judas. We have this a specific reference to Satan entering into Judas. The thing with Luke's gospel is that Jesus' betrayal at the hand of Judas. Remember, Judas was one of the 12. He's one of the apostles, not just a disciple. That the more generic term in Luke, the disciples. But he was one of the 12 apostles, okay? One of the 12 sent ones, okay? And in him, the betrayal happened. So is Luke saying that it's possible that anybody who follows Jesus could be vulnerable to something like this? Maybe. But it's definitely something that we'll see played out in the Last Supper and such. Then the day of the unleavened bread on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. So Jesus sent Peter and John saying, "Go and prepare the Passover meal for us that we may eat it." Now remember, the chronology that we have of these last few days of Jesus is that the crucifixion is what happens on the day of the preparation for the Passover. And in the Synoptic Gospels, Luke follows the pattern of Mark, and Matthew follows the pattern of Mark as well, where the Passover meal is not the day of Jesus' death. That's the day of the Last Supper. Where do you want me to make preparations? Listen, he said, when you've entered a city, okay, he gives them all these instructions about getting a large room, an upper room, fully furnished, make preparations, and they prepared the Passover. So verses 14, so chapter 22, verses 14 and following, this is what we read on Palm/Passion Sunday. Remember, Palm Sunday, which is on April 10th this year, Palm Sunday is specifically a thing that has Jesus enter Jerusalem. And then Passion is the emphasis of what happens after the supper. And this is where that Passion Gospel for the year for Luke, year C, begins in chapter 22, verse 14. When the hour came, he took his place at the table and the apostles with him. So remember, apostles is a very specific group of people. That's the one names the 12. I've eagerly desired to eat this Passover before I suffer, for I tell you, I will not eat it until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God. Some authorities, some texts read, I'll never eat it again. Some feel as though this is a reference to the big feast in the afterlife, which is one picture of the way heaven is, which is a big festival and celebration. Maybe that's what he's referring to, but he's definitely saying that this is the last time I'm doing. This is the that's why we call it the Last Supper. It's the last. It ain't happening again. Until, the great forever feast in the sky, right? Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he said, take this and divide it amongst yourselves. Notice he takes the cup first, which is interesting. Well, that's because in a Passover Seder, there's many takings of the cup. The taking of the cup, if you've ever been a part of it, it's like you drink a lot of wine during one of these things, and everything is kind of laid out for you. But he takes the cup, he tells you, this thing about take this, divide it amongst yourselves, for I tell you that from now on I will not drink of the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes, okay? So is he doing that? Well, let's just go on. Then he took bread. So notice he took wine. He said, spread this amongst yourselves. And now bread. When he'd given thanks, he broke it, gave it to them. This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. He did the same with the cup after supper. Okay, so there was the cup. There's multiple cups, right? So this is that cup that comes afterwards. This cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood. He is filling the Passover Seder with new meaning, okay? And he equates the wine with his death. So we see in these words the institution of the Lord's Supper. We get clues from other gospels that are much more formulaic, but we have the basic thing here of giving thanks, breaking it, and giving it, okay? Thank, break, give, okay? This is what we do in our Eucharistic feast on Sunday mornings, do we not? Then he mentions the one who betrays me, his hand is here, but this is going to be, this is just the way it's going to go, all right? Jesus reflects this knowledge that what is about to go down has to go down. It can't go any other way. It has to go the way it's supposed to go. Notice at the table, verses 24 to 27, we have a dispute. We don't see this in every, this teaching put in this setting everywhere, but remember I mentioned there's three major sections of Jesus' teaching. This last section can be divided into, well, there's the teachings that he does in the temple, and then there are the teachings he does at the table, okay? Temple teachings and table teachings in this last section. This is one of the table teachings. And this is about the dispute about which one of them was to be regarded as the greatest, okay? Can you believe that at that supper? Yes. The kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those in authority over them are called benefactors. I am among you, last sentence of verse 27, but I am among you as one who serves. Jesus is defining for the disciples the meaning of true discipleship, okay? This is how he puts to end that conversation. Verse 28, but you are those who have stood by me in my trials, and I confer on you, just as my Father has conferred on me, a kingdom. So he is giving authority to the disciples, right? So that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and you will sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. So he answers the question of who is the greatest by saying, none of you are, and all of you are heirs of what I have started here. So notice he'll say that you weigh all so that you may eat and drink. Interesting. Judas was there. Is he included in that? We don't see anything that specifically excludes him now, do we? All right. Verse 31 to 34, there's a foretelling here of Peter's denial. We're familiar with Peter's denial. We've already seen Satan mentioned when it said he entered Judas, right? Now Jesus says that Satan has demanded to sift you all like wheat. And so there was it's as though Jesus is saying that there's a conversation at the spiritual level of that they're all going to get tested, okay? Apparently Judas was particularly vulnerable because what we're told is just Satan just entered Judas, okay? Oh, Lord, I'm ready to go with you to prison and to death. But Jesus said, Peter, I tell you, the cock will not crow this day until you have denied three times that you know me. This is what we get here. All right. And we have more teaching at the table. He's saying, he talks about sending them out without a purse, bag, sandals. No, you'll never lack anything if you follow me. Okay. The thing about the sword. Okay, let's look at that. He said to them, but now the one who has a purse must take it, and likewise a bag. Jesus recognizes that there is work to be done, and you're going to need to be ready for it. And the one who has no sword must sell his cloak and buy one. So a sword isn't necessarily something that you have to have for killing people. It could just simply mean it's something that you do for food or whatever. Notice that they said, look, here are 2 swords. And he replied, it is enough. Look, 2 swords for 12, 13 people, right? It's like, this isn't a fight. We just need to have the preparations that you have in the world if you're going to continue being my disciples, which is what he says he's going to do, that they're going to do. He came out and went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives. The disciples followed him. Notice now the scene shifts from the table to the Mount of Olives. This is where we have the thing about the prayer. He withdrew, knelt down and prayed, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. This is following in line with the picture that we get of Jesus in Gethsemane when from the other Gospels, not the same that we get in John, where he doesn't ever pray something like this. But in this case, we see a consternation, which is important to reflect on the human element of who Christ was, right? Verses 43 and 44 are they're dubitable whether or not these are actually original. There are some early manuscripts, some of the most important ones that we have don't have these verses in them. but they were known in the 2nd century. So we're not 100% sure if they're original, but they have so much testimony to them that they're included, but they're in brackets, where it says, verse 43, 44, then an angel from heaven appeared to him and gave him strength. In his anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down on the ground. This reference is something that we see the use of metaphor, simile, specifically simile, because of the fact that what we have here is his saying that drops like blood. Just like when he was baptized, that the Spirit descended on him in bodily form like a dove. So this is not uncommon as far as a literary way of expression, which Luke uses. But he don't notice, we're not 100% sure if these verses were even in Luke. We want to be careful when we insist that what about the thing about sweating blood, okay? We don't know if that means that if it's a reference to the color, the texture, sweat drops like blood. What could that mean? It's hard to say, although it's probably best that we just don't go to town on it, okay? There are some things in Scripture that we can, like I say, go to town on. This is not one of them, okay? When he got up from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping because of grief. Grief. And he said to them, why are you sleeping? Get up and pray that you may not come into the time of trial, because we are about to, or the time into temptation. And then we have the arrival of the soldiers, right? While he was still speaking, suddenly a crowd came, and the one called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him. Now, we were never told in Luke's account when it was that Judas leaves, okay? We are just told that Satan entered into Judas and that he went away and conferred, but we don't know that he wasn't present with the rest of the disciples at the table. Oh, yes, we do. We know he was present because Jesus says that he says that the person, my betrayer, is here and his hand is on the table, okay? So we're not told when Judas leaves, okay? We're just told that now he enters with the soldiers, okay? He approached Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus said to him, Judas, is it with a kiss that you are betraying the Son of Man? You see, the kiss is an expression of acceptance, of congeniality, compatibility, accepting of, like declaring yourself one with the person. This is what the kiss would mean. But yet, it's not really what he's doing now, is he? When those who were around him saw what was coming, they asked, Lord, should we strike with the sword? Remember, we're told about the swords earlier. Then one of them struck the slave and the high priest and cut off the right ear. But Jesus said, no more of this. And he touched his ear and healed him. Jesus was very specific. Remember, Luke's presentation of Jesus is that he is not a revolutionary. He's not a rebel. He is not trying to start a revolution. So therefore, the no more of this and the restitution of the ear is all symbolic of this is not the way that's going. I'm going to just back things up. Let's back it up a bit, boys. And he does. No more. No more of this. And he touched his ear and healed him. Jesus said to the chief priests and the officers and the temple police and the elders who had come with him, have you come out with swords and clubs as if I were a bandit? When I was with you, day after day in the temple, you did not lay hands on me, but this is your hour and the power of darkness. So what was going on here? Remember, the popularity of Jesus with the people. had led the temple authorities to let him just go and go and go. So this attempt at doing taking him in the Garden of Gethsemane is a way of circumventing the crowds and not getting the crowds hostile, okay? Those that liked him anyway, right? They seized him, led him away. This is where, to the high priest's house, this is where we have this thing where Peter is confronted and he denies Jesus 3 times, just like Jesus told him that he would. And Peter went out and wept bitterly, verse 62. Now the men who were holding Jesus began to mock him and beat him, blindfolded him. Okay, this is all about when Jesus predicted all this was going to happen. He talks about the suffering. He talked about the being spat upon. He talked about the disgrace. They blamed, prophesy, who is it that struck you? And they kept heaping many other insults on him. All of this fulfills what Jesus said would happen. It says, when day came, the assembly of the elders, the priests, they gathered, they brought him to their council. If you are the Messiah, tell us. And if I tell you this, you will not believe. And if I question you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God. Jesus' response is always toward the big picture of what must happen. Remember, are you then the Son of God? And he says, well, you say that I am. Wow. You say that I am. That doesn't mean that Jesus is not saying that he is the Son. It's just that because in John's gospel, Jesus kind of does say that already. And so look at this. Then they said, what further testimony do we need? We have heard it ourselves from his own lips. The fact that he doesn't say, I am not this or I am not that, that's what they're saying. That if you're not going to deny those kind of accusations, that means you're accepting them. That's why they are saying, what more do we need to go on? All right. Chapter 23, Jesus goes before Pilate. It's a much different kind of a conversation than we have with Pilate in John's gospel. Are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus is like, well, you say so. So there's that again, right? The chief priests, I find no basis. So we see in Luke's gospel an attempt to portray Pilate as looking for every reason to let Jesus go. This is not an anti-Semitic thing. This isn't a pandering thing toward the Roman government. Because after all, if you look forward in the sequel to Luke's gospel, the book of Acts, what do we have? We have a very clear presentation of Rome being favorable to doing what needs to be done in order for the gospel to get to Rome. So what Luke sometimes does is show Rome as doing inadvertently being a tool that God uses for propagating the gospel, if you will. But this is consistent if you think about it, because also Jesus had to die, right? And the Jews didn't have the authority to do that. So therefore, this is a way of mitigating, if you will, those nasty Romans. It's a way of currying a little bit of, okay, well, even though the Romans aren't great people, what they did was in line with what God was about. This is not unusual. Remember, in our Old Testament story, how the prophets interpret the activities of pagan rulers to be furthering the overall will of God, especially in Cyrus of Persia, the enlightened leader that allowed for the exiles to return to the land of promise. So Pilate being cast in this light is not uncommon, okay? In Luke's gospel, this is the one place where he is sent also to Herod, okay? Remember we had heard earlier in the gospel that Herod was looking for an opportunity to see Jesus. He was entertained by Jesus, okay? He wanted him to do like magic tricks for him. And so like in Jesus Christ Superstar, we actually have a scene where he is taken to Herod, and that's where we have that great musical number by Herod. You are the Christ, the great Jesus Christ. And it's like a calliope kind of a song. What's the word? The old vaudeville style of a thing. Like, I want to see a show. That's not what Jesus was about, though. Only Luke has that incident of Jesus being sent to Herod. Okay, then he gets sent back to Pilate. This is an example of how, so remember, Herod he represented a little bit of the Jewish control in that he was a king, but he was also, partially Jewish. Pilate not, right? It shows how the thing that gets Jesus, the thing that kills Jesus, is the partnership of the religious authorities with government authorities. And anytime religious authorities and government authorities work together, that's when we have bad things happen. That seems to be what Luke is saying here, and that's how he keeps from over blaming one side or the other. He specifically is saying that it's a combination of the two that is what is to be feared. Okay, Pilate he says, okay, I'm just going to have him flogged and release him, but say, array with him. This is verse 18 in chapter 23. Release Barabbas for us. We're familiar with that. But they kept shouting, crucify him. Why? What evil? But he kept demanding that. They eventually release Barabbas, and Jesus is handed over as they wish. So the thing that's ironic about this is that the people, this isn't the same people who were in the temple listening to Jesus teaching. These are the people of Jerusalem, not the people that came with him into the city, but they are in some way disappointed with the message of this Jesus, that they would want him crucified, that they would rather have this Barabbas, who was probably somewhat of like a revolutionary type of a character, and saying, well, if Jesus were this, we'd want to keep him, but you know what? He's not doing what we want. So what we have here is the element of Jesus' own religion that was wanting an overturn of the government, and Jesus saying, I am not going to be that kind of Messiah, period. All right, so they led him away, verse 26. They seized Simon the Cyrene. This is when they laid Jesus' cross on him. Notice he goes to the cross. Two others also, verse 32, who were criminals, led away to be put to death. They came to the place that's called the skull. This is where, notice the very right, very forthright way they say, that he talks about his crucifixion. Look at the, where is the reference? I'm looking, they seized him, followed him, the women, bless her, burn. Okay, when they came to the place, verse 33, when they came to the place that is called the skull, they crucified Jesus there. Notice, very forthright, very quick statement of it. Nothing no embellishments or whatever. And then we have the incident with the father for Jesus saying to the one, today you'll be with me in paradise. Verse 44, it was now about noon, okay, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. That's the reason why a lot of churches have what's called a 3-hour or a tre ore service on Good Friday. That's when they will recognize that those 3 hours that the sun's light failed. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two. This is a symbol of the fact that the stuff that's done in the temple is done, okay? No more separation, no more need, no more proprietary God access, okay? It's now open to everyone. Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Having said this, he breathed his last. And we have a centurion who says, certainly, this man was innocent. We don't have, in some of the Gospels, it says, certainly this man was the Son of God. We don't have that. We just have a declaration of innocence or a recognition of the fact that this injustice, notice it stated, comes from a mouth of a person who's a Roman, right? Another way that Luke is showing how it's not all Rome that's killing him. It's that confluence of religion and government. Remember, because he doesn't put the Roman government on the outs, if you will. All of his acquaintances, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance. The thing about the women from Galilee, this is one of the motifs that we find that are always there. They're always around. Luke is keen on reminding us that. We were reminded that in chapter 8 about there were women who accompanied him that did things, and now that the women had seen this, it's like they play a role in the witnessing of the resurrection, of the resurrection appearances. Now we have a story in verses 50 through 56 of Joseph of Arimathea. He takes the body of Jesus, lays him in the rock-hewn tomb where no one had ever been laid. It was the day of preparation, and the Sabbath was beginning. Okay, the women who had come with him from Galilee followed. They saw the tomb and how the body was laid. Notice the women lurking in the distance. Then they returned and prepared spices and ointments. On the Sabbath, they rested according to the commandment. Remember, this is one of those motifs in Luke where there is supreme compliance of Jewish things, okay? And observing the Sabbath is very important. He wouldn't want them to not observe the Sabbath. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they came to the tomb, taking the spices they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb. And when they went in, they did not find the body. And while they were perplexed about this, suddenly 2 men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, notice it didn't say angels. It just says men, in dazzling clothes. It could have been angels if they're dazzling clothes. That's usually the case, but he doesn't use that word here. Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here. He has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and crucified and on the third day rise again. Then they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told this to all the 11 and to all the rest. This is one of those things where with the women, remember, the women were key in this. They get mentioned here and there as being present, and they are the ones who receive the charge to tell everybody else, right? Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. So there weren't just 3 of them. There were others. We don't know how many total, but this is an example of how Jesus, in talking, he warned the disciples that they would be tested. Remember, all of the disciples included the women for Luke. And so They go and tell it to the apostles. The apostles are the 12 men, right? So it's the women who become the model disciples. The apostles are the ones who are like, not so sure about them. Look at verse 11, but these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them, okay? So this is interesting. The word that the women were given was totally delivered the way it was supposed to, but it was still not believed. Peter got up, ran to the tomb, stooped, looking in, saw the linen clothes by themselves. Then he went home, amazed at what had happened. Notice we don't have any story of John being with him like we do in the Gospel of John. Doesn't say he believed, it just says that he's amazed, right? There's a lot of ancient texts, though, that don't even include that verse. Okay, now we have the Emmaus story. Now on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus. Now, when it says two of them, does it mean two of the apostles, two of the disciples? We don't know. It just says two of them. Very interesting. Talking about each other, what happened while they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them. Their eyes were kept from recognizing him. They said to him, "What are you discussing with each other while you were talking?" They said, one of them, whose name was Cleopas. Okay, right? Cleopas. So it's like, well, this isn't one of the apostles. This has got to be one of one of the people in the group that are called disciples, right? Well, we know what happens here in this verse. They don't recognize him. Jesus does open the scriptures to them to tell them all these things that must happen, and they still don't recognize him, but they invite him to eat, and then it's in the eating that they finally do recognize him. Notice he says to them, so he went into say, when he was at the table with them, this is in verse 30, he took bread, blessed, broke, and gave it to them. Remember the same thing that happened back during the Lord's Supper. Then their eyes were opened and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. This is a testimony to the supper being a way for us to recognize the Christ that's present in all of us. In our Eucharistic feast, in the Episcopal Church, we talk about the real presence of Christ. Yes, we do believe we don't try to explain how there's a real presence of Christ. We just say that there is. This is definitely an example of the way this was so for the earliest church, okay? These disciples, notice it says they realize, this was him. This was Jesus. And then he disappeared. The same hour they got up, returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. Okay, so this is how we know they weren't amongst the 12 apostles, right? And notice the 11. Notice that minus Judas, he gets taken out of the count, right? They were saying, the Lord is risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon. And they're saying, wait, but he appeared to us too. Then they told what had happened on the road and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. This is a cue that from now on, the breaking of the bread is going to be a way that we can experience the resurrected Christ. This is the reason why we do the Eucharistic feast every Sunday. This is the Gospels tell us that this is our avenue. This is our avenue to it. So we do that. All right. Okay, let's finish this up. The last 20-some verses here. Verse 36. While they were talking about this is the disciples. The 11. Jesus himself stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." We say that in church, right? They were startled and terrified. They thought they were seeing a ghost. Why are you frightened and doubts? Look at my hands. Touch me and see. A ghost doesn't have flesh and bones as you see that I have. So there was a way of him showing himself that his resurrected body looked a lot like his real body, right? While they were in there, they were disbelieving. So he said, "And have you anything to eat?" And this is where he talks about, eating with them. They gave him a piece of broiled fish. He took it and ate it in their presence. Again, I believe that this encounter is to emphasize how the presence of Christ is in the communal eating, okay? Then he said to them, verse 44, "These are my words that I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms must be fulfilled." Notice this thing about the law, prophets, and Psalms. They were all considered to be, in the early church read all of that literature as pointing to Christ. He becomes the new hermeneutic by which we understand the Hebrew Bible. "Thus it is written, the Messiah is to suffer and to rise, repentance and forgiveness of sins is to be proclaimed. You are witnesses of these things," verse 28. "And see, I'm sending upon you what my Father promised. So stay here in the city until you've been clothed with power from on high." This is the reference to the fact that, okay, the Pentecost thing with the coming of the Spirit, this is going to happen. Wait here in the city. Remember that. Wait here in the city. Remember, everything key happens in Jerusalem. Then he led them out as far as Bethany, and lifting up his hands, he blessed them. While he was blessing them, he withdrew from them and was carried up into heaven. Here we have the ascension. This is the great finishing up thing. "And they worshiped him." Notice what they did. And they returned to Jerusalem with great joy. And where were they? Yeah, last verse. "And they were continually in the temple blessing God." So this is a part of Luke's emphasis on the centrality of the piety, if you will, of the disciples, and the fact that they recognized the fact that they are shown as recognizing Jerusalem as a holy place, and that the temple was the place where they should be. This is all a part of Luke's overall emphasis of this isn't some revolutionary group. These are good Jews, and they're just trying to follow what God is doing. And this is that next thing that God is doing. That is it for the Gospel of Luke. I hope that you found it of value to go through it as quickly as we have. It is indeed, I believe, helpful to see it in broad strokes. Yes, it's fun to get back into the nitty and the gritty, but otherwise, if we don't do this, then we can't see what the overall way it goes. I hope it's been a blessing to you. Have a blessed Easter. Peace.